you very much, Abby. Hello, everyone, once again, also from my side to this FFG Academy webinar on how to apply to the COST program. Thanks to Abby's friendly and kind introduction, you have already heard who is talking to you now for the next 1.5 hours, and you've already shortly seen me. I would now like to start this webinar before we go into the content by actually also hearing a little bit about you, about our target audience today. And I would like to do that via a short poll. And you will see in a second how this will work. You will actually get a small pop-up on your screen where you will be able to answer the question that you see in front of you, namely, how well do you know the COST program? This is just for us to get a little bit of a feeling of our target audience and the level of knowledge amongst our listeners. So you can indicate whether you have maybe already submitted a cost action as a main proposer, have participated in a cost action as a management committee member, so really in the core consortium of a cost action, or just in a cost action network activity like a workshop or a training school, not being any further involved into the cost action itself, or the COST program is entirely new to me. So you have a few more minutes, not minutes, sorry, seconds, to answer this poll. And I see here on my panel how high the percentage is of people who have already answered the question. We are already at 90%, so I'll just give you 2-3 more seconds, and then we will see how the involvement has been so far in the COST program. Okay, so we've now nearly reached 100%. So Abby, please feel free to show the results. And now you can also see them. And here you will see that the big majority of listeners today are newcomers to the COST program. We're always very happy to have new people joining in and listening to us and hear how to get involved in the COST program. We have approximately 30% who have already participated in any way in a cost action network activity, and very few of you have actually really actively provided a proposal, submitted a proposal, or participated in the management committee. Thank you very much for participating in this very first poll. It's good for us to know who are listening to us today, and then I can also adapt accordingly a little bit. So let's have a look into what we are speaking about today. Again, the COST webinar of today is about COST applications. So we will basically talk about your network and how to set up your network. After all, COST is a networking program. And in a second step, how you will write your proposal. So we will basically present you the rules and regulations for participating in a cost action proposal and submitting one. But we will also complement this information by tips from our practice as the national coordinator and getting to read a lot of proposals and the experiences we made throughout the last couple of years, what is important to consider when submitting a cost proposal. And last but not least, we will have the question and answer session that Abby has already mentioned before, where all unanswered questions so far can still be raised by you, and then we can go into detail on anything that is still open. So this is the content of the presentation. Let me at the very first begin with a little bit of a look at the COST program overall. After all, 66% of you said that the COST program is entirely new to them. So I will just spend 2-3 slides to talk a bit about the COST program in general, so that we are all at the same level of knowledge. Let me start at the very beginning, which was in 1971 when COST was founded as the oldest program on the European level for research cooperation. That was about 10 years before the first framework program, the predecessor of the now running Horizon 2020, was started. And back in the days, there were lots of scattered research initiatives all over Europe. And the idea back then was to raise these initiatives on a European level, to bring national researchers together to exchange ideas and find cooperation potential and synergies, and to support this kind of networking activity. And in its essence, that is what the COST program still does. It provides funding for networking. So all the costs that arise for getting together and network are covered by the COST program. So these are, for example, travel costs for traveling to workshops, to conferences, to training schools, and that organization of these events. So when you host a training school, for example, at a university in Austria, that would also be covered. Joint publications, and last but not least, finally, even though the COST program does not fund the research, the personnel costs for research itself, there is a lump sum provided for the administrative personnel, the one that is in charge for the financial distribution of the funding and these kind of things. And this is 15% of the overall sum of the funding. So with doing so, what COST actually does and what it helps with is that you can connect with your peers, with your European colleagues, visit institutions to use their infrastructure to learn new methods and to better collaborate. And while the COST program is not necessarily a program that has its main focus on career development, it's still a very well acquainted program to fund, to help with the first steps of early career researchers on a European level. It's very easy in a COST network to meet people that you would normally only meet during a conference, at a coffee break, and have only very few minutes to talk to, and use this COST network with real dedicated workshops and conferences and training schools to engage, to potentially meet future PIs and more. So it's all about building European networks, and this again then building the basis for further European funding, for further European collaborative projects and more. So COST very often calls itself a pre-portal for further EU funding. And there are actually also numbers that underline that. When you look at Horizon 2020 proposals, for example, that come out of COST actions, then they do have a significantly higher success rate. And these are not just promotional talks. It's actually clear that when you work together for 4 years in a network, you know the people better, and then of course you know exactly who is good in what, and then your chances are sure higher for being successful in further funding. And yeah, as I already said, COST actions always run for 4 years, and the participation in running COST actions is possible. That's quite a specifica of COST, that the network is actually, you can change, you can include further partners. The ones of you who know Horizon proposals or projects, you know, when you have an amendment, it's really hard when you lose a partner or want to gain a new partner. In COST, this is very simple, it's very open, and I will come back to how this actually works. That was it so far for COST at a glance, so that we're all kind of at the same level of knowledge. There might be sure people among you who say like, okay, that was very quick and that's a little too less for me. There is more information to be found on the various websites. I would also highly recommend to check out the COST Vademecum, which is to be found on the here mentioned link, because it's actually a very good document that explains everything from the beginning of a COST action to the end, what has to be considered and what networking activities are available. So this is very useful to get a first impression of the COST program. And I would also like to draw your attention to the COST YouTube channel. They have a very well set up YouTube channel with inspirational videos, but also with a few explanatory videos that are helpful to get a bit of an overview what the program is actually about. And of course, you can always come back to us if there are any more open questions on the general aspects of the COST program. But let's now go into detail of your actual proposal. And I would like to spend quite a bit of time talking about your network of proposers, because again, as I said, COST is in its essence a networking program. And so it's important to think about your network and who you integrate and how all this works. Let's start this section with another poll. You already know the drill, you already know how it works. In a second, there will be a pop-up with a question for you. Here multiple answers are possible. So please just indicate what you think, who can actually participate in a COST network. So here we have various options. We have, for example, a department head of the FH Klagenfurt. If anyone of you is English speaker and not familiar with FH, this is the University of Applied Sciences. We have an employee of an SME, a short and medium-sized enterprise, a PhD student at the University of Vienna, head of unit of the European Commission, and also my neighbor Hans would like to take part in a COST network, and we will see very soon if he's able to do that. Take your time. I see we are at about 50% of answers. Just give it a few more seconds to think about what you believe, and then we will have a look what you think and what is the case. So we are at nearly 70% now. I'll wait another few seconds and then we will show the answers. Abby is actually still in the background listening in, and she is a very helpful assistant in this webinar. So she will now present you the results of this poll.
Thank you, Nicole. I will now close the poll and we'll show you the results.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And here we go. You can see the results of the poll right now. And we see that most of you believe that the three first people are able to participate in a COST network. And then not so many believe in the head of unit of the European Commission and the neighbor Hans. So that is interesting for me to see, and you will now very soon see what is really the case. Let me go back to my list. So actually everyone apart from neighbor Hans, very sorry Hans, can participate in a COST action. The rule here is COST actions are open to all researchers, engineers and scholars or other stakeholders who are committed to work and achieve the action objectives and are affiliated to a legal entity. And this is actually the rule that excludes the neighbor Hans, because he is a private person and therefore not able to participate. If he had like a one-man business and is registered as a legal entity, then yes, Hans could also participate. And also a head of unit of the European Commission can participate, and I will come back to that in a second. But so basically the rule here with COST is that it's not necessarily only scientists. It's basically any expert, anyone who has a say in your research field, who can bring in a benefit to your research field. And I think that's very important to consider when you think about your network. You can actually think broadly and come up with people who might be relevant, no matter if they're from some kind of associations or public authorities or whatever, who might help, particularly also when it then comes across your impact, who you would want to integrate into your COST proposal. And here our tip is to already think in the proposal stage when do you want to include the particular relevant stakeholders? So the idea here is referring to what I said before, that the cost actions are open networks, so you can actually also include participants when the cost action is already running. And here, for example, when you think about public authorities and bringing your research then already to a stage where you say you really want to have an impact on a local, regional level, and you need public authorities to do so and to bring that further, then you could bring someone in, and you would maybe do that rather at the end of your cost action, while at the very beginning or for the whole runtime of the cost action, it would not necessarily be relevant to have this person there all over all the time. So these are considerations that you can make about the respective relevant stakeholders that you want to include into your network, on when to include them in, and in which level of involvement. So this is not something that you have to actually define during the proposal phase, as in really in the proposal itself, but it's good to think about this right in time so that you can be prepared for when it actually happens. So a few further factors on the network of proposers. Another thing is the integration of early career investigators, as they are called, ECIs. It's basically a term for early stage researchers, young researchers, however you want to subsumize the group of people here. We have a definition at cost, which says researchers in the time span of up to 8 years after the date of obtaining the PhD doctorate. So now two things. First, I said that it's a program that is not necessarily has its focus on career development, and the integration of early career investigators is not an eligibility criteria as such, so that you have to do that to be even eligible. But in the evaluation, there are the evaluators will have a look at the career development plans, at training schools, at the integration of early career investigators. So it is crucial for your success to think about how to invest in the education and the support to young researchers. Second thing is, we had in our poll the PhD student, and the PhD student is actually also a potential participant, as we said, even though he or she does not fall under the definition of an ECI. That just means that they are not counted as an ECI when it comes to statistical analysis, but they are still allowed to participate. So think about integrating young researchers. The COST program is the perfect program to integrate researchers that are at the beginning of their career to step up and to build their European networks. The second part is the integration of partners from so-called inclusiveness target countries, and this is quite a big topic, so I have a few slides particularly referring to this, so I will come back to the inclusiveness target countries in a second. And then there is also further factors, geographical balance and gender balance, which are not as important as the integration of ECIs and ITCs, particularly because the ITCs are really eligibility criteria. But sometimes it's really about this half point that really makes a difference. It's a high competitive program, and it's just good to have this in the back of your mind. If it's not applicable to your respective research field, that's totally fine. It's just something, when you address that and when you show the evaluators that you are aware of this rule, then it's just good to include that into your proposal. There are lots of research topics that just have a strong male focus, or that geographically just focusing on the Balkan area, and then that's totally fine. But just keep it in mind that they will look upon that and that it might need 1 or 2 sentences referring to that. And other factors are interdisciplinarity and intersectoral That doesn't sound quite right. So lots of cost networks are interdisciplinary. They don't have to be. I'm just saying, also consider if it would be worth looking over the limits, the borders of your research topic, if it would make sense to collaborate also with other disciplines. Intersectoral, the same, if it would make sense to include industry partners, partners from an SME or from a local authority, from an association or so. Just think about that when you set up your network. Now let's come to the eligibility criteria, to the minimum criteria before you can even start considering setting up a cost action. The minimum criteria to submit a cost proposal is a network of 7 different costful or cooperating members, and I will tell you in a second what this means. And a minimum of 50 partners, 50% of partners must come from these inclusiveness target countries, the ITCs. So here we are back at the ITCs, and I will show you what this exactly means. COST is a program with 38 full members and 1 cooperating member. And you see that here on our Europe map, all of these countries, all the colored countries that you see are actually members of the COST program. And of these 38 countries, 21, these are the ones that are marked in slightly greenish turquoise, are the inclusiveness target countries. And this only means, inclusiveness target country only means that looking at the research investment on a national level, that this is lower than the average of the full members. And there is a high focus of the COST program on these countries. Just a short info for you where this comes from, because it might be irritating, because COST has been promoted as a very open networking program, and those of you who might have known it before know that this was not always like that. There was not always this quota, but it's actually the case that COST is funded by 100% out of Horizon 2020. And 50% of those is coming from this pillar widening, from the widening pillar. And so the program committee on this, from this pillar says, like, okay, we give you so much money and we want to see some focus on the countries that we are actually targeting. So this is where this comes from, and this is the reason why the ITC countries have a special focus, and now we have this quota since like about 1.5 years or so that has to be fulfilled, and is really a eligibility criteria. The cooperating member, by the way, is Israel, and Israel has the same rules and regulations and can participate like a normal member. They are just not allowed to vote in the committee of senior officials, of course. Again, ITCs, when you need more information on that, I would like to refer you to the so-called CESA guidelines. CESA actually stands for Submission, Evaluation, Selection, and Approval, and it's basically your Bible, if I might say that, as a proposer for a cost proposal, because you find in the CESA guidelines really everything that you need to prepare your proposal. And at the very end of the CESA guidelines, you also see the table of how many cost members you have and how many ITCs you need. And you will see here, unfortunately, they also round up. So if you have 7 members, you need 4 ITC members. Because this is a really crucial topic, I will spend one slide also explaining this a little further. When we talk about 7 different costful members, we actually talk about 7 different costful member states. COST is a transnational program of states, and so we are always counting the respective. You are represented by a person that is affiliated to a certain institution that is situated in a certain state, and the state is who counts in the count. So when we talk about 7 partner organizations, as we can see here in this first example, we have 7 partner organizations from 7 different countries, and 4 of them are ITC countries, so this is totally fine. In the second example, we have 7 partner organizations, but only from 6 different countries because 2 come from Austria. So this network would not be eligible. You don't read the minimum criteria of the 7 different costful member states. Also here, 9 partner organizations from 7 different countries, that's fine, but here we only have 3 different ITC countries, and this doesn't reach the quota, which actually has to be 4 in that case. So also here, this consortium would not be eligible. I hope this makes it halfway clear. The tip here would be, just in case of any insecurities, to get in touch with us. We are also in close contact with the respective other cost national coordinators all over Europe and beyond. And just in case, if you say like, I have a lack of inclusiveness target countries, then you can, we can also try to find partners through our network. I've deliberately chosen partners here from countries that might be of interest to Switzerland, for example, as not being a member of the European Union, is a costful member state, so they are treated as any other costful member state. And the UK is, of course, a specific topic that earns its own slide, the Brexit. What shall I tell you? I can tell you what I know by now, and everything might be different in approximately a week from now. But this is what we know. So for a potential no-deal Brexit, the UK government has signed an underwrite guarantee so that they will pay basically for the funding until the end of 2020, the funding of UK participants in cost actions. So for you as a potential main proposer of a new cost proposal, which will only be submitted end of April and then will be evaluated and will only start most likely only next year, and this is actually more or less irrelevant. The thing with cost, the UK at cost, is a little different than with the UK at Horizon 2020, for example, because UK is a costful member state independent of their participation in the European Union, same as, for example, Switzerland or Turkey. They are also costful member states. So the participation is actually not that much the problem, but the funding is, because cost is fully funded out of Horizon 2020 and will be integrated into Horizon Europe. So when the UK doesn't provide money for the funding program like Horizon Europe, then here we might face difficulties. So that's the status quo. Nothing is really decided yet, but it's only a question of a few more days until we know, hopefully know a bit more. Our recommendation for now would be with cost being such an open program, it's actually not that much of a problem if you include a UK participant into your network. And then when your cost action is actually funded, then in a year's time, we will know way more about this and then see if you can take this person on really or not. I would just not make sure that you reach the minimum criteria also without your UK partner, but in general, you can take them on and that's not the problem. We would just recommend to not define leading roles for the UK partner for now and have backup plans if that's a really crucial partner. There are still options, and we will see that in one of the upcoming slides, on how to include partners from a near neighbor country and to have trainers at training schools or speakers at workshops, so you can still integrate this partner then into your cost action, but maybe there might be an issue with the funding, and there are sure enough ideas already in the drawer on how to deal with that. I just know that the cost administration is in close touch with the UK representatives, so they don't tell us much about their plans, but they do say that they have some backup plans in their drawers, and then we can only rely on that and see what comes up. So again, for the submission deadline now in April, if you have a UK partner on board, that's okay. Maybe think about it not, maybe not in the leading role, or if you want that, then have a backup plan ready. So much for that. It stays exciting. One last thing about ITCs. There is a rule that at least one of the leading positions of the management committee have to be made available for participants from ITCs. So that's not something that you have to define in your proposal or write about, but it's good to be aware of that already during the proposal phase. Who are the partners which take on which role, and who of your ITC partners would you see in a leading role? So think a bit about this role management, who could be in charge for what already in the proposal phase, and include in the proposal at least that you are aware of that and that you will consider that. Also, what they like to see is events that are planned in ITCs. And again, in the proposal phase, you don't need to be very detailed about that, but just indicate that you are considering to organize events in these countries, then you'll be fine. And by saying that, with the proposals I see, you can sometimes tell the difference in between those proposers who have really like a well thought through plan in comparison to others where you say like, okay, we know ITCs are important and we have to throw in a few sentences here and there to show that we are aware of that. And this, it's easy to tell when you read a proposal like that. So just make sure to think it through, because it is a focus of the program. Looking a little further, COST, as I said before, is a very open program. So it's not only open to the COST member states, but also to the so-called near neighbor countries and international partner countries. And we also had that during the poll, not only that, but also European RTD organizations, international organizations like, for example, the UN, or EU organizations like the European Commission itself. The only difference, and this is here slightly indicated by the different colors, the gray written partners, international partner countries and international organizations do not receive funding. They can still participate, can be observers, but they do not receive funding. And your neighbor countries, for example, do. So you can, if it is relevant for your action, for your research topic, think about including partners from other countries too. And I will show you in a second who these partners are. Our tip here would be, if you intend to do that, to include these partners already during the proposal phase. They do not count for the minimum criteria for these 7 partners, but it is easier to integrate them into the cost action when they have already been part of the proposal than when you add them later. You can still do so, it's not a problem, but it is a bit more of an administrative task than if they are already part of the proposal. And then we talked about international partner countries and international organizations who do not receive funding, and that's of course an issue sometimes when you say like, okay, this person from the US would really highly be interested, but they don't receive any funding, so they would have to travel on their own costs. Here there are a few options. to, for example, when you have external speakers at cost action meetings, at workshops, or a trainer at a training school, you can invite people also from an international partner country, for example, and they receive funding for that, for their travel costs. And if you then combine your workshop to a management committee meeting, for example, on the next day, they would only have to pay for one hotel night or so, and they could participate in the next day. So these are ways on how to involve partners from actually non-funded countries. So, and here you just see the map of near neighbor countries and international partner countries. In the middle now, here in light blue, we have the cost full member countries, both ITCs and non-ITCs in the same color. In orange, you see the near neighbor countries, which you have also listed here. And the international partner countries are actually all the other countries of the world. So there is no difference. Only here on the map, there's indicated which countries are already involved in running cost actions. So with all these countries marked in dark blue, there is already cooperation and they are already participating in cost actions, and some others are not, but that doesn't mean that they are not allowed to participate. So it's really open to the whole world. Okay, some final tips referring to your network. One question that we always receive when we give consultancy services to our clients is budget on the one hand side and size of the network, and this is highly interlinked. So in general, you don't have to prepare budget plans for your proposal. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should not think about how much stuff would in general cost, so do make plans in the back of your head. In general, one can say that there are about 130,000 euro funding per action per year, approximately. The thing is that it's calculated so that the budget per cost action is calculated on basis of an estimation on experiences, because in general, all cost actions have the same kind of networking activities. You have 1 or 2 management committee meetings per year, you have workshops, you have training schools, you have short-term scientific missions. And on the basis of that, it's quite easy for cost, running since like the 70s to have a bit of a feeling how much money such a cost action normally needs. And so that's how the budget is actually calculated. And the basis for that also is indicated by the size of your network. So in general, they say for a cost action at the size of 20-25 partners, have this approximate 130,000 euros per action per year. So when you now, and that's very often the question about how big has my network has to be at the beginning of the proposal, the minimum criteria is 7, so you can easily submit with 7 partners, but just bear in mind that this is the basis for the calculation of the budget, and the cost association does calculate that you most likely will grow within the first year of the project, but if you grow exponentially during the first year of the project, then you might have an issue with your cash flow. So here, consider this starting budget when you say like, oh, easy, we just start with 7 partners and then we grow. It's an open program. We grow within the first year up to 20, then you might get issues here. So that's just to consider when you consider the size of your network. Another thing, and I've already mentioned that before, is the roles. And here, just to add to what I already said, there are these key roles, not only the one that has to be attributed to the ITC, but in general, the potential chair, the vice chair, another very important role, the grant holder, which is very often at the same institution as the chair. Can also be in another institution when you say like, I would rather like to focus on the scientific part, and there is actually a partner who is very well experienced with the administration of EU projects or so, then the grant holder could actually also be at another partner. But in general, this role is very important, and it's not a role that I would like raise my hand for at the first meeting and say like, yep, okay, I do that, just thought about it for 2 seconds and I'm in. Hardly ever happens. So it is good to already think about these roles and the potential partners to take them on during the proposal phase. You don't have to define that in the proposal, but I think it's good to know that in the back of your head. ITC we already discussed. And when you think about the inclusion of your neighbor countries and international partner countries, consider if they're really beneficial and where the mutual benefit of this integration is, because this is something you really have to write about in your proposal. Start early with the registration of secondary proposers. It's the easiest thing, but if you have to, if you have a professor that still has to set up his ECOS profile and then he does that 10 minutes before the submission, it should not, excuse me, it should not be a problem then so it should before the submission if these things are not done. You can really start early with that. We will see in a second at one of the next slides on how this is done, and it's really an easy process to inform the people right in time. And here we are already at the second part of the presentation, where we really look now at the proposal itself. So we spend a lot of time on the network. I think that this is covered, and now we can really look into the proposal and how it has to be set up. First, most of you will already know that, and we have also promoted it. The upcoming collection date is the 29th of April at 2 p.m. Two significant factors here. Collection date is just another term for deadline. Actually, cost functions under an open call system, so you can basically submit all year long, and then at a certain date these proposals are collected and evaluated. And please consider the deadline is at 12 at noon. So most of the Horizon deadlines, I think, are at 5 p.m. or so. So just that would be really bitter if this would be the crucial factor here, 12 noon. The next collection date is coming up most likely in winter 2020 or 2021. So we think December, January. Normally it's every 8 to 9 months. They haven't announced a clear date yet. I don't know if they will do it short before Christmas or short after. It's not going to be a great time either way, but it's going to be published soon, at the very latest on the 29th of April, because then they always announce when the next collection date is coming up. Now, having a look at your proposal. The proposal consists of two parts. There is an online part and the classical technical annex, which has to be uploaded as a PDF, and that happens via eCost, the eCost tool. These are all the sections that your proposal consists of. The one marked in light blue here is your technical annex, the PDF, and all the rest is online. And I will now go through every section with you, what is important to consider here, and at each and every one section of your proposal. Let's look at the general features first. That's basically pretty easy. You just mention a title, your acronym, and write an appealing summary. What we hear from evaluators is that they very often start with reading the summary, and if you already make them interested and inspire them, then this might be a good start. Then you have to choose your key expertise, so to say, out of OECD thematic fields. There is a long list of research areas, and here you can choose in between 1 and 5 of these research areas. This is used to identify also the evaluators, so that the closer you get to your research topic, the easier it is then also to find experts that really fit for evaluating your proposal. And choose keywords. That's optional. You can choose 3 to 5 keywords to further narrow down topic of your proposal. The next online section is references. This is optional. You can very well include references also in the technical annex in the PDF. Most likely it will be relevant in the section 1, scientific and technological excellence, where you would refer to literature. You can do that directly in the text of your technical annex, section 1, or wherever it is relevant. Or you can choose to save that space and put the references online. No footnotes, so you would either put it into the text or you put it in this online section. These are the two options you have to state your references. Another section is cost, mission, and policies and the network of proposers. Cost, mission, and policies is also to be filled out online as mandatory. This is where you have to write a bit about how your proposal and your topic fits together or contributes to the cost, mission, and policy. So if you want to really do good work and if you want to really be among the top proposals, then it might be advisable to also read the cost, vision, and strategic goals document, which you will also find online, and to get acquainted a bit with the cost strategy and where are they heading and what is important for them, to get to know the program a little bit better. I think that maybe only bring you half a point, but sometimes this really makes the difference. So here our tip is to read the relevant strategy documents. And again, what I already said, when it comes to your network of proposers online, send out the invitations in time. That's actually a really easy thing to do online. You basically only have to add the name and the email address of the respective person that you want to add to the proposal, send out an invitation, they get an email and click on a confirmation link, and that's how they participate in the proposal. So there is nothing, no contract to be signed. It's just basically an expression of interest. And as I said before, when the proposal is then successfully evaluated and you will be funded, then these secondary proposers can still decide if they will participate in the cost action or not. So it's really very open and easy expression of interest at that stage. Yeah, that's what I said already. Now looking at your technical annex, at the PDF part, that's of course kind of like the core of your proposal. This is a template to be filled out. It is allowed that you write 15 pages maximum. And it consists of 4 sections. So those of you involved in Horizon, or you have already been involved in cost before, this recently changed. So normally there is always this structure, 3 chapters: scientific and technological excellence, impact, and implementation. And only very recently this changed to another section was integrated on networking excellence. So what was done was basically pulling out all the networking aspects that were integrated in the other chapters and set up an own chapter. Again, in the CESA guidelines, you will find every information, and you will also find the template online on how to fill out these respective sections. Here, it's important to consider that when you're doing a resubmission and you might have submitted like 2 years ago or so, then please make sure to use the new template. In general, it's always important to use the actual document, but it's online on the website anyway, so just use the current documents. And one thing that I would really like to draw your attention to, and which is not so widely known, is that the cost proposals that have been successful and are now running cost actions are actually all available online. So this is of great help for you as a proposer to have a look at proposals that were successful, how they did it, how they wrote their proposals. It's a little tricky to find them when you go on the cost website on the browse actions. There are all the single actions. You can also search for cost actions from your respective field so that you find one that might be closer to your own topic. And then on each side of each cost action, you will find documents, and there is a document called Memorandum of Understanding, so you wouldn't search for it there, I'm pretty sure, but in the Memorandum of Understanding actually is also the technical annex included. So the initial proposal is included in this document, and so you can read through successful proposals, and I think that's a really helpful thing for new proposers, which is a specificum here at the cost program. You can, for your overall proposal, you can get a maximum of 50 points. The sections 1 and 3 get 15 points each, and the section 4 gets 5 points. The threshold is 34 points. That means people, consortia with less than 34 points will never ever have a chance for funding. But of course, as a high competitive program, the cutoff, so really until or up from which number of points actions are actually really funded, lies in between 44 to 46 points. So it's a success rate of approximately 11%. The gray zone that I mentioned here means that normally when we say, like, for example, you have 40 new cost actions, 40 actions are funded, the 31st actions with the highest points, and here we speak really about like 47 plus, are automatically funded. And then there is a gray zone of, let's say, 25 proposals, and out of this gray zone, the last 10 or so proposals are then chosen on the basis of exactly the criteria that I was mentioning before: integration of early career investigators, geographical and gender balance, interdisciplinarity where it makes sense. So all these things are considered here, and it might, and we had that case that it's really painful to see then proposers with a higher amount of points not being chosen because they didn't work out this plan so well, and also and foremost also the ITC plan. So this is why these things absolutely do count to make a difference here. Our tip here would be, again, in the CESA guidelines on page 26, it is, you will find a list of questions that are actually handed to the evaluators. So they get these 10 questions on the basis of which they make their evaluations. There are 5 points per question. And I think these questions are quite helpful when you go through them, or when you give your proposal to someone you trust and say, like, okay, here are the questions, please evaluate our proposal according to these questions, because they're helpful to really critically check the proposal if it reaches the expectations, so to say. Okay, so that was a general overview about your proposal, how it looks like, what has to be included. When it's now time to actually write your proposal, that's of course your task, your research, your science that you write about, that you explain best and summarize best in 15 pages. I know that's quite a challenge sometimes. What we did here now during the next few pages is, and I can show you the first one, is we've gathered comments from the evaluation summary reports from real evaluations that we got from the evaluators, and we clustered them into the sections and divided them by strengths and weaknesses. And I would just leave that like that and let you, the presentation, as we heard before from Abby, will be online. Read through that. There are just comments on what they have found, where they say, like, okay, this could be improved, or this has actually been done very well. Because the writing part is actually really something that is very individual, and that has to be done by the individual network. But here are a few hints and tips on what is considered by evaluators and what is important to be considered by you. For section 2, there are only a very few because we only have one evaluation summary report so far on that. The problem here for us is also that as FFG, we do not get these evaluation summary reports from the Cost Association. That's a difference to Horizon 2020, who get all these reports. We only get them from our clients, and not everyone is, of course, open to provide these reports, and so there are only a few, but still I think quite helpful for you to be able to read through these comments. Another thing I would like to draw your attention to, and I think that is also, it earns its own big red slide here, is the topic anonymity. Anonymity is important for cost proposals. That's a specificum here, been discussed a lot, but it's still there and it has to be considered. So we will go into that in a second, but first I would like to invite you for another poll, because there hasn't been one in a while, and I hope you're still with me, and I will see you in a second. And so here's a question for you referring to anonymity. Here we have John Smith, who is an expert at the MIT, and he's very important for the success of your cost action. So are you allowed to mention his name in the technical annex, so in the PDF part? We will now open the poll, and you can indicate your answers, whatever you feel like might be the right one. Is it either no, the PDF part must be 100% anonymous, or yes, all key partners can and also should be mentioned, or yes, because he's a participant from an IPC, from an international partner country, and because of the mutual benefit. It needs to be, it can be indicated who he is. We are now at approximately 70%, so I give you a few more seconds, and we will see then. It's always very exciting, to me at least. So now we're at 83. So then I would say, Abby, please feel free to close the poll and to show us the results. Thank you very much again for participating in that poll. Here you can see two majorities. I mean, there was no one was really entirely sure. I guess it's also a quite difficult question here. We have 45% each saying something, yeah, the contrary of each other. No, it must be 100% anonymous, or yes, all partners shall be mentioned. And the 9% of you who have indicated the last question are actually the ones who were right. Congratulations to the few of you. And I will tell you in a second what's the story behind that. So those of you who answered no are sure the ones who know that cost proposals have to be anonymous, and that's in general right. So it's important to write them entirely anonymous, but there is this one exception. So in general, in your PDF part, don't mention any names, any organizations of partners that are involved in the proposal, in the network. Also, don't use any connections to previous projects or associations or so, where it's easy to say like, okay, this is the same network that was involved in this or that project. Nothing like that. So there should not be the chance to learn who the partners in your network are in the PDF part. The only exception here is the section 221, securing the critical mass and expertise, and 223, mutual benefits of the involvement of secondary proposers from your neighbor countries, IPs, international partner countries, or international organizations. And here is really all about the mutual benefit. So when this is a high-level researcher whose impact or input into your cost action is really of a mutual benefit, then this organization, this person, or whoever can be mentioned in the PDF part. But Nothing else, nowhere else. Of course, you may say now, but hey, wait a second, at the online part you have all the list of names and email addresses. Of course, yes, that's the online part. This is a part that does not go to the evaluators. So that's totally fine. In the PDF part, the reason behind all of that, and again, as I said, that has been discussed quite a bit, is that they say like they want COST to be an open program also for young researchers and for less research intensive countries. And it should be the same chance for like each and every one. There is no name dropping. There is no saying like, wow, this professor is leading this network and I should not be impacted by that, but I'm kind of am. And so that was the decision why anonymity was introduced. Of course, the arguments on the other side say like, well, if you're an evaluator that is very well acquainted with that topic, of course you kind of know who the main players are and literally know exactly who is who when you read such a proposal, but still this is how it is. And so please bear that in mind, because it is an eligibility criteria and they check up front, and if there are any names in there, then the proposal is not even getting evaluated. Talking about evaluation, here you see the timeline. We are now a little bit ahead still of the collection date on the 29th of April. In between May and September, there will be the evaluation leading to the selection in October. Selection is basically what I said before about the gray zone. So there is a scientific committee of COST, which will then, out of this gray zone, pick the last COST actions to be funded. And in November, then this will be approved by the COST committee of senior officials, and the results will be published, and then one can approximately expect the start of the new COST actions in early 2021. Okay, we're coming close to the end. At the end, a few more helpful links and documents. Here on this link, and I was referring to the CESA guidelines before, to your proposal template, to the vademecum, you all find all the documents you need via this provided link. Again, the vademecum is really something that you don't necessarily need to set up your proposal, but I think it's good to read through it to know already how COST actions are run, what kind of network activities you have. So it's really useful to read through that too. And if applicable for you, for your respective network, then there is also a file referring to international cooperation and specific organizations' participation that might be useful for you. Information and services from aside from FFG, we offer consultancy services like this. We offer webinars, we have our website, and we also offer a proposal check like we do for Horizon 2020 proposals. So in case you decide after this webinar, yes, this sounds awesome, I'm starting straight away writing my cost proposal, you can send it to us and we can check it for you. And there is no internal deadline for that, but the sooner the better, of course, so that you can also integrate our comments if you feel like it. What we also do is then at the next level, when cost actions are already funded, there is another step, as I mentioned before. So some secondary proposers might not step in to really become a member of the management committee. New members will be included. So that's also what we do here at FFG. We do the nominations to the management committee via another expression of interest, and we are basically the link between Austrian clients and the COST Association. So we also have a very good contact with COST scientific officers and with admin officers. They're all people living living in Brussels and working there, and they're all like, you know, you can talk to them, and it's good to have this link, which we can, if there are any questions or concerns, you can always come up to us and we can get in touch with them. Our website, I've mentioned it before, here is the link again. And well, you've already seen me before smiling into the camera, immobile, but here is another picture of me and my colleague. We're the cost team here at FFG, and we're always there for your support. That's the end of my presentation now, and that's the moment when we open the floor to your question and answers. And I'm pretty sure that our lovely assistant Abby is already